For what we've been talking about is a set of research projects that we've been carrying out. Whilst I was over in Laughlin, I talked about stage one of our research, which is introducing the correlation between information regarding the correlation between UFOs and the paranormal field. And we got to talking about the apportations. It's often found within poltergeist infestations, some interactive haunting cases. What we'd noticed around about 1995, completing studies, was that there seems to be significant mechanics involved in regarding the asportation and the apportation. That's the spontaneous arrival of an apportation, and the asportation, which is actually the disappearance of it. Okay. Most of the time, nobody ever actually is ever reported seeing the asportation. It's never seen. Maybe there's an observational effect that the phenomena won't take place whilst watching. We've had very similar incidents during poltergeist infestations where we thought we saw a cushion move on a settee. And of course, I was deep in conversation with an investigator. Our eyes are drawn to some movement over there. We focus on this cushion. We both thought it had moved. And it was only when we thought we must have both been, just wrong about this. We looked back away from it, entered into conversation. And at that very moment, it hurled itself across the room. So it was as if like it was paused from conducting its movement because we were watching it. So maybe that there is this observational connection, just like we've talked about in your lecture and my lectures about this double slit experiment or the dual slit experiment, that we seem to affect what's going on when we're actually watching it. So the asportation is never been seen. The apportation, the spontaneous arrival, seems to be at a flick of her fingers how fast that occurs. Now, what is interesting is that during 1995 through to 1998, we realized that there was a displacement effect, a characteristical measurement found in certain buildings where paranormal incidents were taking place. For instance, if an object would disappear, it was later found in a resting place, normally no further than 30 or 40 feet away. It never seems to have been further than that. But the amount it had moved from point A to point B, its disappearance to its appearance, which is what is referred to as a displacement of that object. The displacement effect, for an instance, an object was found to move at 38.2 inches. Then a plant pot moved on the windowsill and it was seen, appeared on the other side of the windowsill. And again, we were seeing the 38.2 inches. It happened 4 times. That's not by chance. So there was seen to be some type of mechanism or rule book to the phenomena that suggests that the apportation is so very precise that it can actually create the same phenomena in a mathematical sense to move a set amount of distance. We also realize that when objects do disappear for a duration or length of time, is there a limbo effect? I don't think so. I think the gap in between asportation and apportation simply is that the object is probably buried in the walls, under the floor. They're so resourceful, this phenomena, that it doesn't waste anything. That's why when things disappear, they're always going to reappear, and you know exactly it's a paranormal act. They're not going to do something and move something that you might consider, oh, it's just a normal thing. I must have left it there accidentally. There's a reason why TV remote goes missing, keys, important paperwork, and sometimes these turn up in the most ridiculous areas where you know that you've already looked, B, you would never actually ever put it there. Now, that is all about stage one, about the apportation. When we start to move forward into stage 2 of our research, what we realized is that we were actually questioning the fact is it exactly the same object that's come back? Just because it looks like it, just because it feels like it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be. So on one occasion, what we did, there was an apportation of a mug, ceramic green coffee mug. It was a set of 4 that the owner had purchased. So we took away with us that apportation, and we took the sample mug away with us. So we marked it up. This is the one that was at the apportation. This is the one that was the sample mug. And what we did, we broke them down. We looked at them under the microscope. And this is where it started getting very interesting, because what we found is on a molecular level, the mug that had apported, which is absolutely identical to the other mug. Now, these are mass manufactured. This should really be no difference if they're built in a set and put together on the production line in the process of making. We could see that there was a significant difference in the microscopic particles of the ceramics in the apportated mug than it was in the other mug, the standard mug, should we say, the sample. And what we noticed is that in the sample mug, the ceramics, it's been already heated under manufacture. So it only gets the heat of the once. And you can see the rough edges of how the ceramics are binding together. However, on the apportated mug, when you look, it's all very smooth. It's as if like it's been reapplied. It's been, this heat been reapplied to this. And this is, you're right by sending me that link over, there is thermal dynamics that are actually involved in this. How the thermal dynamics involved starts getting very interesting, because what we started to realize then is that there's possibly two things here. It's a dielectric field, or there's some type of high amount of electromagnetic energy. As soon as you start looking under effects, unusual effects through electromagnetic energy through the internet, you'll suddenly hit something which is not in the field of the paranormal. You're going to fly right over through the other side of the subject into the ufological field. Because when UFOs have suddenly manifested, just as an apport would manifest, that arrival is affecting plant life in that location where these things have been seen. And we actually start to look at the actual research papers which have studied and analysed the plants which have been affected by the ufological phenomena. You see exactly the same process. They're talking about diathermics, they're talking about EMF, they're talking about dielectric, they're talking about exactly the same thing here, applied to be a mug or the manifestation of a mug, a manifestation of a UFO. I think the same principle of physics here are used in the same pot. And we've talked about this before, about having these barriers, and they have become barriers. We created these boxes many years ago: paranormal, supernatural, spiritual, metaphysical, and ufological, and all these wonderful little boxes. But the problem is, the phenomenon isn't bound by those rules. It doesn't stay in the box it should be, because what we are finding is that it creeps into the paranormal creeps into the ufological, and as the more you study, the more you'll find that, well, hang on a second, this phenomenon consists of all these boxes. We should have never had the boxes. The biggest problem we ever started with was in having these boxes, because it created people to actually only study this area and never look what's going on over on the other side. And by doing that, this is why people, I don't think, are getting all the answers, because they're stuck only looking in one direction. And I think what you got to do is start looking at the whole realm of this phenomenon and start saying, okay, it's metaphysical. You know, it has the capabilities of spontaneous arrival, just as apports do. There really is no difference in an apparition of an ET and an apparition of a spirit person in your bedroom. It seems to be the same things. The effects from seeing these things are usually the same. You know, the people are reporting that they can't move, they have paralysis during these experiences. Exactly the same thing again. This phenomenon seems to tap in the source, I think, that we already have, because that mechanism for paralysis is already within us. It's called output blockade. We all have it during our REM sleep process. You know, while we really are asleep, we cannot move. And input blockade happens, so we cannot hear. So basically, we're in that process. Imagine waking up in that process, and people do, and it's called sleep deprivation or paralysis. However, with that mechanisms already in us, the source is here. However, something external comes in and utilizes what we already have and says, I'll switch the button off, I'll switch that button off. So basically, they're taking control of what we already do in a physiological and a psychological sense we have.
Psychology departments and parapsychology departments around the world have pondered for many years the aspect of sleep paralysis and what it really consists of. Those statistics would seemingly suggest that everybody in the world will experience sleep paralysis at least one time in their life. There are people who have had sleep paralysis for many, many years and have never reported any anomalistic phenomena. What we have learnt through psychology is the process of sleep. When we are truly asleep, it's known as rapid eye movement, REM. However, there are other forms of sleep, hypnopompic and hypnagogic, the process of waking up out of sleep and the entering into dream state. Now, what we actually experience during the REM process is two things. There are two switches within our brain, and this applies to everybody during the REM process. What the brain actually does, it causes something referred to as output blockade. Output blockade stops us from swinging out in our sleep and in our dreams and lashing out at our partners. The unfortunate thing is people do report that, but that is when people are usually coming out of the sleep process, the hypnagogic or the hypnopompic state, going in or going out, never in the REM process, because the brain paralyzes us during REM. Which means that we are unable to move. It's a self-protection process in a sense of speaking, and for others, I guess. Also, what's also interesting here is that it provides another switch which allows us to not hear during REM process. This is known as input blockade. It stops us from hearing anything. A brass band could come round your bed whilst you're in REM process and you would not hear anything. What we do know is that the brain is much more active whilst we are sleeping than we are awake, and we really have no idea. There are some theories behind that, be it that we are more consciously aware of the universe around us, that we are entering into processes where we are more prominent to our sensory inputs around us. In other words, we're more attuned to things that might go bump in the night. And that's an interesting point, because people do report during sleep paralysis, they're waking up, not being able to move, and having often unusual experiences, be it a paranormal incident that takes place, an apparition that appears in the room next to the bed and they cannot move. Sometimes dark figures are reported. Also, what's interesting is that the ufological side, people also report that beings have appeared in their bedroom under the same state. They suddenly wake up and they cannot move and they see these small beings, entities, whatever they are. What's interesting here is that the possibilities of the phenomena utilising what we already have could be taking place. What we're actually looking at more commonly now is the fact that such phenomena might be able to trigger the responses we already have in our brains. In other words, the output blockade switch and the input blockade switch can be manipulated by the phenomena. In other words, it's just coming along and utilising what's already there within us, and it's switching us off. Now, this could be because some entities believe that it's a protection thing, that you don't wake up and you lash out in fright at these entities. It could be simply because it's a protection process. One thing is for sure, that we have not got all these answers, but we are continuing to complete our studies and try and find out more about the relationship between phenomena and the sleep process.
So when you start looking down this sheet between the paranormal and the ufological, the tick boxes are all starting to tick. So you start to realise that's only the second stage. We've got to start getting into the third stage of the mechanics of this. Then you start to realise that there is communication sources which can happen between either side, be it paranormal, be it ufological. ET channeling and seances are one of the same thing. Aleister Crowley did that many, many years ago. He knew you could open up not just communications with, I always say, alleged spirits, because they'll tell us what we want. They'll say what we want to hear. We can really never know the authenticity and the intent of what we're communicating with. Only provide evidence that we are communicating with an intelligent source. That's plentiful. There's huge amounts of information. We've done it ourselves. However, slight push forward a little bit more, you start getting communications coming from allegedly ET intelligences, talking about things that, the Vril Society did exactly the same thing during the Second World War. This society, which was basically formulated as a metaphysical study group, that's the ironic thing of this, a metaphysical study group, channeled the ETs and apparently relayed information backwards and forwards so that they could obtain information again regarding certain technology and possibly anti-gravity and where they came from and so on and so forth. And it was allegedly the Aldebaran system and these particular beings. Now, you move that forward in time to the Skull experiment, which is a famous experiment that took place in the UK. In this small room, it's 8 foot by 9. They said there was a blueprint. We have to bring more people in, to build up the energy to be able to create more phenomena. A bigger act requires more energy to do. And to do this, they had to have a certain gathering on their side. And a blueprint is literally made of that environment. And then what they do is, through this connection, they move it on their side, which adversely affects our side. So if that is the same way, in other words, there's a connection. It's like for every equal opposite, there's attraction. You know, you move one, it affects the other side. If that is the case after making a blueprint, then we're assuming then that the same phenomena happens regarding the apportations. Somehow this apportation, there's a blueprint made of it, it's moved and it affects our side. However, sometimes there can be a duration between the asportation and the apportation, and that can be half an hour, it could be days, it could be even weeks sometimes. Things have turned up where people don't own them. In fact, you know, there has been numerous occasions, you know, belongings have been found. Now, it's tied so much into the ufological phenomena that people have been seeing, you know, phantom things just happening in front of them at specific times, as if this phenomena is not a house-centered phenomena. The apportation has never been a house-centered phenomena. It's a phenomenon, it's linked around individuals, because they could be walking down the street and something will suddenly fall. We've had been to certain places in certain forests, which are apparently, you know, a lot of strange things going on there, and had stones, literally small. And what's interesting, the stones are like the ones you might find on a beach. They're smooth, they're rubbed down. But when you pick them up, they're warm. They're actually warmer than a larger item. So it would seem the energy it's associated with moving these apportations, the manifestation of these things, is that it's more concentrated when it's applied to smaller items, because they seem to be hotter. When you pick the stone up, you can feel it's quite hot. But larger items seem to be warmer to the touch, but not as warm as smaller objects. We measured on certain mugs and things like that between 12 and 15 degrees difference. But these small stones, they're going like from 20 to maybe 35 degrees difference, you know, because they're smaller. But they suddenly just drop out of nowhere, you know, a rubbed down pebble in the middle of a forest. It just doesn't, there's nothing in that environment like that. But it not only happened once, but it happened 3 times consistently right in front of us. Even though we were walking, it would always happen about 2 foot in front of us. You'd see it literally fall in front of you. You'd never see it manifest. You'd just see the falling action. And of course, there's been plenty of research in that field in regarding items that have suddenly turned up, old coins. Sometimes we bring phenomena back with us. We can't help it. When we stay in those locations, sometimes we're saturated with the phenomena so much that it bring it back home. It's like bringing your work home. Occasionally for up to 72 hours, you might get a buzz of things happening in your own home. And we've had it. I've had it here. I've had a very unique 25-cent coin, an American one, suddenly appear in the hallway in a patch of the carpet, with very light coloured carpet, so you couldn't miss this thing. There's a reason why we see these things. There's a message to this. There has been a number of occasions during paranormal investigations and ufological ones that things unfold for an absolute reason, even if it's just being directed. We know that through communication sources, through instrumental transcommunication, which is the kind of the old wording to EVP, because it utilizes numerous different pieces of equipment, that we were getting information that was, and it happened 6 or 7 times, pertaining to 18 months in the future. Now, we didn't know that at the time until it unfolded. And that pushed us back into research again to see, was that coincidence? No, it wasn't. There was a further 6 incidents. The furthest we know we've got is 18 months. Well, it was actually 19 months and 3 weeks or something. So that's the furthest we've been given information, which is foreseen, foretold, and we knew it was coming. We actually planned for it. It's ironic. After the 5th or 6th time, you kind of take it verbatim. Okay, these guys, they know. There's an instant Akashic record that seems to be available to these. And we don't know who these guys are, but they sound human. They talk to us. Sometimes they tell us they're spirits. But then they have deceived, because we've done research. We've been told that, oh, yes, my name is this person. I died in Birmingham in 1983 in a car accident, and da-da-da. You do your research, there's nothing available. You know, we live in a very small country, the UK, where people pass away through accidents. It's registered, it's logged, it's somewhere. no such record of these people. And I think to myself, are we really being told who they really are, or are they just telling us what we want to hear? Because we know from the process of the Philip experiment that took place a number of years ago, that there was a group that actually manufactured a ghost. They actually sat down, they wrote out, they created a life, they created an imagery of him, they drew how he'd looked, gave him a name, gave him a personality. They literally brought this being into the real world. And after a number of weeks, this thing manifested. They were experiencing paranormal actions from this entity that should have never existed because it was all manufactured. But they brought it into the real world. And this is what we're seeing time and time again. We're bringing the psychological aspects of this phenomena into the realism, into the created, the real hard world. And we're seeing that in stigmata as well. Exactly the same thing. You know, we know that the power of belief is an amazing, amazing thing. And because people are devout believers in having the wounds of Christ appear on them, that they've manifest. We've done this under hypnosis with people where we've placed a 2p piece on their arm. We've told them that it's hot, and they've actually blistered. You know, so there's a reasoning to physical phenomena taking place, because I think we bring it into existence, just as we talked about the Philip experiment and the C5 initiative regarding meditation groups. They go out to a location where alleged UFO activity is taking place. They meditate, they sit around. What is that? A meditation. Sitting around in meditation is no different than a seance sitting. It's exactly the same thing, just a different name. And what do we get? We sometimes, occasionally, will get, if we're lucky enough, the manifestation of a UFO. It's conjured phenomena, it seems to be. We're conjuring the phenomenon simply through us so much wanting it to happen that we bring it into existence, just as we have done with the paranormal. It's exactly the same thing. Now, the question is the conjured phenomena exactly as what we would expect the real phenomena to represent? I think so. I don't think there's any difference, because sometimes conjured phenomena is developed into physical interactions and experiences which are really no different than a general person saying, I've had an abduction experience. The physicality of it seems to be the one of the same. So then we have to draw the line then and say, okay, well, just because something's conjured doesn't mean it's not that it's not physical in nature. I think it is, with intelligence, intelligent driven. So this phenomena, I think, dealing on the paranormal side and the ufological side, are tapping the same source. And it's more to do about us. We really need to learn a lot more about what our capabilities are, not just by ourselves, but in group format as well, because we can make a difference. This phenomena can manifest, but it can also, when it wants to, be very clever. It can realize that observational connection with the observers. It realizes that it's being watched. It realizes that it's being filmed. Sometimes it won't manifest until you put the cameras away, and bang, there it is. Just exactly the same thing when we had the shoot down order on UFOs, is that just prior to the pilots putting weapon lock on, this thing would do crazy evasive maneuvers. How did they know that this was going to, that he was just ready to put weapons lock on? Because I think there's a connection between even the pilots, military pilots that are seeing these objects, the people on the ground that are seeing objects. This is why you can suddenly have a manifestation of a huge UFO, size of a football field, girder lights and all sorts of things. And literally half the country shall see it, and only 7 witnesses do, 2 police officers and 5 people on the bus. It's ridiculous that should happen, but it doesn't. It's never fallen into the normal characteristics of the physical world. This phenomenon, it never has done. We're trying to crush it and make it fit a square peg in a round hole, because we've only got that round hole to put it in. And I think we've got to do is we've got to stretch this hole out and make it a little bit more squarer, to really start it to fit in there properly. And by doing that, you've got to apply all these other aspects of different phenomena that we've placed in these boxes. The same thing happens with paranormal events, cryptid sightings. You check with cryptid sightings. They're happening where there's increases in paranormal phenomena. They're happening where there's UFO phenomena taking place. UFO, paranormal, cryptid sightings, all taking place in certain areas. Now, if you cross-reference that with the strange disappearances, and I'm being very, very conservative here about strange disappearances, up to 4.3 million people have disappeared under very strange circumstances, such as people just phantomly disappeared. They found a shoe in a tree. A 3-year-old is found 12,000 miles away, 3,000 feet higher in altitude on the top of a mountain, literally. No recollection of getting there. And what we're finding is that these locations, these areas of hotspots around the world, have an ability to show where these things are through a mapping process. The mapping process that we use, which and we put this to the test over the years, Grant, by going to these locations, and hey presto, bang, there it is. The phenomenon represents itself. These are positive magnetic anomalies around the planet. And when you cross-reference the major phenomena, the ufological, paranormal events, you name it, in these locations, and I mean, really go to town. I mean, don't just look at it, really dig deep. Start pulling out all these hundreds of different types of cases, be it the Rua incident, at the school in Africa, be it the Flatwoods Beast, Hopkinsville incident. It doesn't really matter. You'll find there's a connection to these locations and those positive magnetic anomalies. They're right on them. And that can't be by chance, but the major incidents, major ufological incidents taking place, cross-referencing that with the paranormal and the cryptids, they're all in the same locations. So this is what led us to believe that, maybe this phenomena, though we've had this ruse for many years, that look up to the skies. I mean, my mentors told me back in the beginning of the 1980s, it's a very nuts and bolts physical object. You throw a brick, it will hit it. These things are extraterrestrial. They're traveling the distances of space to come to us. Well, we've learned over the years that's just not exactly the case, and I think we're not the only ones. I think ahead of us is government facilities. I think, FBI, CIA, and they've done their own looking into this, the ufological phenomena, and probably found exactly the same things that, they just cannot understand it. This is why you find little bits of information that they've gone to this professor, or they've gone to this specialist, and they're asking these people, what do you think? How does that work? Like David Adair, for an example, they brought him in, they asked him about this so-called engine, and because they haven't got the answers. They haven't got all the answers. And I don't think they've got all the answers. I think they're trying to get them, but I think they have to throw physics straight out the window and look at something completely new here. Now, if that many UFOs are being seen, where are they all? Where are they all going? And the problem with this is that those UFOs, if they were traveling from the distance of space to Earth, we'd see that traffic. It'd be a superhighway. There'd be so much noise from that superhighway. We'd be reading information, hearing noise, trafficking, all that sort of thing from the SETI program. We're not. In fact, the SETI program say space is extremely quiet. I believe that they're utilizing these portals as doorways, getting in and out. But it's a phenomenon that's never left us. It's a phenomenon it's always been here. And it's as age old as it is the paranormal. That's probably all one thing. And what we've done over a period of time, we've created the boxes, we've created these names, and we've thrown them in all different directions. Because there should be no paranormal investigators out there that don't deal with ufological. And there shouldn't really be any ufological guys out there that don't deal with the paranormal. As soon as they do that, then they're not looking at the subject in full. And I just don't think they're going to get any further answers.